Ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new book of the Rambam, book number 9. Like the Rambam always does, he puts a little verse from Tanakh that really captures the spirit of what this book is all about. And this is, of course, a verse from Tehillim, from Hallel. We say it every time we say Hallel. L'cha ezbach zevach toida, uv'shem Hashem ekra. To you, to Hashem, I offer an offering of thanksgiving, and I call out in the name of God. Sefer Chi v'hu Sefer Korbanis. This is book 9. It's the book of sacrifices. Now, as the Rambam defined it, way in the beginning of the whole work, in the beginning of the first book, the Rambam told us which topics go into each book. And he said the difference between the last book and this book is that the last book talks about Korbanot Tzibur, Hatmidim, the consistent communal sacrifices, much more focused on the temple service, which was done on behalf of the entire Jewish people, the daily sacrifices, the additional sacrifices, Yom Kippur sacrifices. Now, of course, to understand that, we also had to have full sets of laws about sacrifices in general, which ones you cannot bring to the Mizbeach, what's the procedure for sacrifices, what happens with disqualified sacrifices, but mostly the focus on was communal sacrifices. This one, book 9, that Rambam calls Sefer Korbanis, he says it's all about the mitzvahs that apply to individual sacrifices. A person brings a personal sacrifice. What is the laws that apply to those? So that's really where we're heading in this book. These ones are going to be korbanos that are uniquely individual. There's no scenario where they're brought on behalf of the community. Hilchos of Sheish v'zehu siduram. There are 6 sets of laws in this book. This is their order. Aleph Hilchos Korban Pesach. We're going to first learn about the laws of the Passover sacrifice. All the Jewish people brought it, but it was individual. Every person or every family was supposed to bring it on their own. Beis Hilchos Chagiga, the laws of the holiday, celebratory sacrifice. Every one of the major holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, there's an obligation for every Jewish person to bring 1 or 2 sacrifices. And that's going to be a section of laws about that. Gimel Hilchos B'cheiros, the laws of the firstborn. Not the firstborn human, the firstborn animal. If you have a firstborn animal, it becomes holy, and either it has to be sacrificed itself, or if it gets a blemish, you can eat it. And the laws that apply to that. Dalid Hilchos Shgagos, the laws that apply to inadvertent sins, and the sin offering that comes as a result of inadvertent sins. Also a personal sacrifice. Hey Hilchos Mechusrei Kapara. Number 5 is the laws of those who need to have a sacrifice to finish their becoming pure. When you become ritually impure in certain scenarios, you go to the mikveh, but besides for going to the mikveh, you also have to bring a sacrifice. Mechusrei kapara means they're lacking atonement. That means their atonement is not complete till they bring a sacrifice. 4 people like that, and there's a set of laws for them. And Vav, finally, is Hilchos Tmura, the laws of exchange. If a person has a sacrifice, an animal dedicated as a sacrifice, and he wants to exchange it to another animal, you're not allowed to do it, but if you do, both animals become holy. And there's lots of laws related to that, which is the final section of laws in this book. And we begin with Hilchos Korban Pesach, the laws of the Passover sacrifice. I think it's funny that last year also we learned near Sukkot or on Sukkot about the laws of chametz and matzah, about Pesach. And here we are again, 1 year later, very close to Yom Kippur and then to Sukkot, learning about the Korban Pesach again. As the Rambam always does, he gives us the list of mitzvahs that are going to be discussed in this set of laws. Yesh bichlalan sheish esrei mitzvahs. There are 16 mitzvahs we're going to be discussing here. Arba mitzvahs aseh, u'shteim esrei mitzvahs leis aseh, 4 positive mitzvahs, and 12 negative mitzvahs. V'zeu pratan, these are their details. Aleph, lishchetas ha'pesach bizmanoi. The mitzvah to slaughter the Passover sacrifice in its time. The 14th of Nisan, the day before Pesach, that's when we slaughter the Passover sacrifice. Beis, shaloi lizbayach oisei ala chametz. We're prohibited to slaughter the Passover sacrifice if we own any chametz. If you have chametz at home, you cannot offer the Passover sacrifice. Gimel, shaloi tolin emurav. The parts, the meats and the fats that are supposed to be offered on the Mizbeach should not be left overnight. They have to be offered that day. One of the big challenges in the Holy Temple, because there were so many Jews bringing a Korban Pesach, the Kohanim had to oversee that all of the meat and the fats that belong on the Mizbeach had to make it onto the Mizbeach before nighttime. Dalid lishchet Pesach Sheni, to slaughter the second Passover sacrifice. If the person misses it for certain reasons, if he's impure or different circumstances beyond his control, he has a makeup time. 1 month later, on the 14th of Iyar, you can slaughter a second Passover. Hey, lechol b'sara Pesach, al matzo morer belil chamisha aser. There's a mitzvah to eat the meat of the Passover sacrifice, together with matzah and bitter herbs, on the night of the 15th. Same thing with the Pesach Sheni. Vav, lechol Pesach Sheni, al matzo morer belil chamisha aser l'chedesh hasheni. There's a mitzvah to eat the second Passover sacrifice with matzah and maror on the land of the 15th of the second month, 15th of Iyar. Zayin, shelo yechal no mevushal. It's forbidden to eat the Passover sacrifice raw, or even if it's cooked. Cooked meaning in water. It has to be roasted over the fire. Ches shelo yetzim mibsara Pesach chutz lechavura. You cannot take any of the meat of the Passover sacrifice outside of the group where it's being eaten. Tes shelo yechal mimenu mumar, an apostate, a heretic Jew, cannot eat from the Korban Pesach. Yud shelo yechal mimenu teisha b'sacher, a hired worker or a live-in worker of a Jewish person may not eat from the Korban Pesach. Yud aleph shelo yechal mimenu ariel, a Jew without a bris, without a circumcision, cannot eat from the Korban Pesach. Yud beis shelo yishber by etzem, we're specifically not allowed to break any of the bones of the Passover sacrifice. Yud gimel shelo yishber etzem b'Pesach sheni, we cannot break bones in the second Passover sacrifice either. Yud dalid shelo yasher mimenu ad boiker, it's forbidden to leave over any of the meat of the Passover sacrifice to the next morning. You got to eat it all that night. Tesvav shelo yasher mipesach sheni laboiker, also the second Passover you cannot leave over till the morning. Tezayin shelo yashir mibsar chagigas arba asar ad yom shlishi, you cannot leave over the meat of the chagiga, the celebratory sacrifice that's also brought on the 14th of Nisan, until 2 days later. You can leave it to the next morning, but not till the morning after that. And we're going to see that besides for the Passover sacrifice, there was also a special Korban chagiga, a celebratory sacrifice that every Jew was supposed to bring to eat together with the Korban Pesach at the Seder. And while the Pesach sacrifice only has one night to be eaten, the chagiga can be eaten for another day, and then after that, it's over. That's the third day that you cannot leave it over to. Ubir mitzvahs elu b'prakim elu, the explanation of these mitzvahs is coming in the following chapters, 10 chapters. So a week and a half for the Passover sacrifice. Here we go, Perek Rishon, chapter 1. Halacha Aleph. Mitzvah saseh, lishchet asa Pesach. It's a positive mitzvah to slaughter the Passover sacrifice, ba'arba asar l'chedesh Nisan achar chatzos. Very specific time. On the 14th day of the month of Nisan, after midday. Ve'ein sheichatin ela min ha'kvasim min ha'izim bilvad, zachar ben shana. You can only, for this sacrifice, you can only slaughter either a sheep or a goat. It has to be a male, and it has to be in its first year of life. It cannot be older than a year. Both men and women are obligated in this mitzvah. So if there's a woman living on her own, she has to bring her own Passover sacrifice. If there's a man on his own, he must bring a Passover sacrifice. If somebody cancels, neglects to fulfill this mitzvah purposely, and day 14 of Nisan passes without him bringing the sacrifice, he has no reason to. He wasn't impure, he wasn't far away, he just purposely didn't bring the Korban Pesach. He's liable to excision. Whereas if you cancel the mitzvah only inadvertently, then you're exempt. We're not going to hold you accountable. Halacha Gimel, ein sheichat esa Pesach ela ba'azara. The Passover sacrifice was slaughtered only in the temple courtyard, kishar HaKodashim, like any other sacrifice. And you look at this, is supposed to be a depiction of what went on. We'll soon see this in more detail. Because there were so many people bringing a sacrifice, so actually the Kohanim usually wouldn't end up slaughtering. Because as we saw in the last book, technically, slaughtering of a sacrifice can be done by anybody. The Kohen has to do the receiving of the blood and onwards. But the actual slaughtering could be done even by a Jew. So what used to happen is, all the Jews themselves were proficient in the laws of slaughtering, and you used to bring your offering to the temple. There was a Kohen standing at the ready, but you would slaughter it. So you see all these lines over here. And we'll soon explain more about these lines. But then the Kohen would collect the blood, and then it would go further. But the point is that it was slaughtered in the temple courtyard. Af bishas heter habamis. Even, says the Rambam, an interesting law, even when the temple was not yet built, and people were allowed to bring offerings on private altars, what's called a bama, lo hayu makriven es pesach bebamas yachid. They never offered the Passover sacrifice in their personal backyard. In the beginning of the last book, we learned that before the temple was built, once the Jews were in Israel, but before the Beis HaMikdash was actually built, there was a Mishkan here, a Mishkan there. That was called a public bama, a public altar. At that time, a Jew could also build an altar in his backyard and offer a sacrifice. But the Passover sacrifice, everybody came to the main area. In fact, if you do offer the Korban Pesach on an individual altar, you get lashes. Because it says, it's a clear verse. You cannot offer the Passover sacrifice in just one of your gates. Meaning, we learn from tradition, this is a prohibition against slaughtering on a personal altar, even when it was permitted to bring the offerings on personal altars. The Pesach offering was always different. Slaughtering of the Passover sacrifice was always done after midday. If you slaughtered it before midday, disqualified. Now, technically the time frame is any time after midday, but in the temple they used to wait till the afternoon service was done. They would only slaughter it after the afternoon daily sacrifice, after they would offer the afternoon incense and the afternoon lighting of the menorah, then they would begin to slaughter the Passover sacrifice till the end of the day. So what if you slaughtered the animal after midday, but before the afternoon sacrifice? Slaughtering before midday, it's out of the question. But you're after midday, you just didn't wait till the proper time. Then it's kosher, it's actually kosher. What you should do is have a kohen mix the blood so it shouldn't congeal. Wait till the afternoon sacrifice is offered and the blood is sprinkled. And then you sprinkle the blood of the Korban Pesach after that. Truth is, says the Rambam, after the fact, if the blood of your Korban Pesach was sprinkled before the blood of the sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice, kosher, it's still kosher. Halacha hey, somebody slaughters the Korban Pesach in its proper time. But at the same time, in his house, he owned an olive-sized portion of chametz. Loike, he gets lashes. Because it says, do not offer the blood of my sacrifice on chametz. What does it mean on chametz? That means you cannot slaughter the Passover sacrifice if the chametz is still extant. Even though Torah says don't slaughter, but it applies to everybody, whether it's the slaughterer or the person sprinkling the blood or the person offering the parts on the mizbeach. If in the possession of any of these people, or even if one of the people that are registered to the group, they're not even in the temple right now, they're just part of your group that's going to eat the Korban Pesach, and one of them has kazayis chametz b'shas hakravase, if they have an olive-sized portion of chametz in their possession while it's being offered, hareza leika the Pesach kosher. You get lashes. The sacrifice itself is still kosher, but it's a prohibition that you've transgressed by doing that. Halacha vav, after the Passover sacrifice is slaughtered, dam ha-pesach ton shvicha keneged hayesod. The blood of the Passover sacrifice is not sprinkled in the classic way. The classic way of sprinkling was to sprinkle it, kind of splash it onto the corner of the altar. The Pesach blood needs to simply be poured by the base. Just poured down by the base. After you spill its blood, you skin it. Here, the kodenes bitnai, they would skin it on these special poles, and they would tear open its stomach, take out all the parts that are reserved for the altar. They had to offer the fats, every sacrifice individually. You couldn't make a pile. The owner of the sacrifice, who was supervising the whole time, would take his animal with the skin, with the hide, bring it to his house in Jerusalem, roast it, and eat it in the evening. It has to be in Jerusalem because that's the only place you can eat the Passover sacrifice. So everybody came to Yerushalayim for the Passover holiday, that's where they would eat it. So basically the point is, that's how you kept hold of your meat, because you would always be near your sacrifice. You would watch the Kohen skin it, take out just the parts that belong to the Mizbeach. After that's done, you take the rest home, go roast it, barbecue in your house. Halacha zayin hamaniach emurin. If you leave those inner parts that are supposed to be offered on the altar, v'lo yiktina, and you didn't offer them, ad shalanu v'nifsalu belina, till they stayed overnight and became disqualified because of that, now you have transgressed a negative commandment. Shenemar, because it says, He didn't do, here it is. You cannot allow the fats of my celebratory offering to sleep overnight till the morning. But here, even though you transgress the mitzvah, you don't get lashes. Why? Because there's no action. It's an inaction. Right? You didn't offer it. It's not on the altar. It didn't go to the altar. In certain scenarios, the fats of the Korban Pesach can continue to be offered all night until dawn. When is that scenario? When the 14th of Nisan is on Shabbos, as actually will be this coming year, it's going to be on Shabbos, Erev Pesach. So then, Shabbos craving b'yamtiv. Fats of a Shabbos offering can continue to be offered on a holiday, which is that night. But in a classic year, Erev Pesach is on a weekday, and it goes right into the holiday. The leftover fats of weekday sacrifices cannot be offered on holiday, and therefore the Kohanim had to rush to get all the fats on the Mizbeach before the holiday sets in. Halacha tes ha-pesach nishchat b'shalish kitas. Special law, the Passover sacrifice needs to be slaughtered in 3 groups. They didn't just allow everyone to come inside. It was specifically divided in 3 groups. Shenemar, as it says, v'shachatu oisei kol kahal adas Yisrael. The entirety of the community of the congregation of Israel has to slaughter it. All these extra words teach us different groups. Kahal, ve'eda, ve'Yisrael. There has to be a community and a congregation and Israel. That means 3 groups. There could be no less than 30 people per group. I'm sure it was usually more, but minimum 30 people per group. Yud, hayu hakil chamishim. What if it's a tragic year? Only 50 people are bringing a Korban Pesach. How do you divide it? You got to have 30 in a group. You only have 50 people. So they bring in 30 people to slaughter. The Yaitzim Asara v'Nichnasim Asara, 10 leave and 10 more come in. The Chayzrin v'Yaitzim Asara v'Nichnasim Asara, then 10 more leave and 10 more come in. So each time you have 30 people in the group. Halacha Yud Aleph hayu pachas mechamishin. If there was less than 50 Jews who were bringing a sacrifice that year, ein sheichatin es Pesach lechatchila. Initially, you shouldn't even slaughter it. Just leave it. Leave it till next month. V'im shachatu kosher. If they did, it's kosher. V'im shachatu kulam b'basachas kosher. Also, if everyone came in at once, it's also kosher. But ideally, you divide it into 3 groups. Ketzad nishchat, what's the basic procedure on how the Passover sacrifice was slaughtered? They would have the Jews come in till the Azara was full. Once the Azara was full, they would lock the gates. Everyone's there waiting. No, we're closing. Pause. Close the gates. And they begin to slaughter the Passover sacrifice, as I showed you over here. Everyone would slaughter. The Jews themselves would be the ones to slaughter. The whole time, when the Jews and the Kohanim are slaughtering and offering the sacrifice, the Levites would read the Hallel. This is pretty controversial because from the simple reading of the Gemara, it seems like the Jews themselves would read the Hallel. But the Rebbe has an explanation why the Leviim would do it, because the whole mitzvah of Korban Pesach was usually fulfilled through an agent. Not everybody brought their own individual one. There was families and one person would bring everybody else. Therefore, with the Hallel, it also makes sense that we should choose agents to do it for us. The Leviim would do it for us. If the Levites finish the whole Hallel, but the group is still going, still offering, shoinim, they repeat it. If they repeated it and it still wasn't complete, mishalshin, they do it a 3rd time. Historically, they never did it 3 times. Yud Beis, al kol kriya, toikin shalish tkiyas b'chatzaitzris. For every reading of the Hallel, the Kohanim would blow the trumpets. Tkiya, trua, tkiya. Long blast, broken blast, long blast. Since there's no wine libations accompanying the Passover sacrifice, which is usually when the trumpets would blow, toikin b'shas shchita, so here we blow during the offering itself, the slaughtering itself. Halacha Yud Gimel, hakoyanim oimdim shurais. To accommodate everybody, the Kohanim would stand in rows, as you can see over here. Ubideyan mizrekei kesef or mizrekei zav, holding silver and golden receiving cups. Shura shakula kesef, shura shakula zahav. There was one row of all silver, you see here, all the silver ones, and here a row of all gold ones. They didn't mix, so it should look beautiful, nice pattern, symmetry. all these cups did not have bottoms, so they shouldn't put them down for a second and have the blood congeal. And watch what would happen. If you think about it, the blood of every single sacrifice needs to reach the altar. But if everyone's going to slaughter only near the altar, it's going to take way too much time. So they had this row, and the Kohanim had this super cool procedure. Shachat HaShoichet, the person who was slaughtering would slaughter the sacrifice, the Kibel HaKohen, and the Kohen would receive the blood. Noisne lachaveire v'chaveire lachaveire. And each Kohen would hand off the cup to his friend, Kedei she'yisasku rabim b'mitzvah, so many people should be involved in the mitzvah, Ad she'yagia hadam etzel kohen hakadov lamizbeach, till they will reach the Kohen closest to the altar. Shoifchei shvicha achas keneged hayesoid, he would quickly pour it once, opposite the base. Umekabel mizrak echad malei v'achar kach machzer asarekon. He would receive one full, and then give back an empty one. Because there was a full line of people slaughtering, so every Kohen would pass back and forth these cups. A full one going towards the Mizbeach to be sprinkled, and a empty one coming back to be down the same side. They would have both hands operating. Josephus actually, when he writes about this, he says they would go so fast that it looked like arrows shooting. That's how efficient they were. They would pass it back like this, like this, like this, not spilling any of the blood. It's like a training thing to do, special training over here. So that people could constantly fill their place. Next person comes in, and they're able to keep the blood going to the altar and sprinkling the whole time. Then again, like we said, you hang it up on these hooks, you skin it all, take off all the skin. Where's that picture I put before? Here it is. The koira, you tear it open, and you wash out its intestines. You clean out the intestines, take out all the garbage and all the feces. You take out the meat and the fat that belongs on the mizbeach, you put it in a special bowl. You salt it, and the Kohen offers it on the mizbeach. How do they hang and skin the animals? Typically there was 8 or so skinning poles, but this is hundreds of sacrifices. So they had special ones. There was iron nails banged into all the walls and all the pillars around. So for Passover, they put in all these nails around so everyone can find their own place and skin their animal. If it was packed, you didn't find the place to hang. They had accessible these thin poles, smooth poles. You and a friend, you balance it on your shoulder. You put one edge over here, other edge on your shoulder. You hang the animal on the pole, those very sturdy poles, and you can skin it literally right in front of you. Tesvav, Shalmo, Milahakriv, once the first group finishes their offering, the Kohanim go back, they open the doors of the courtyard. The whole first group goes out, second group comes in. Repeat. One second group goes out, third group comes in. The first one's actions were the exact same procedure for the second and the third ones. Once the third group finished and went out, you can imagine super wash. Right? They needed a deep clean of the azara, there's tons of blood and all the stuff hanging out. They would wash it. Talmud actually describes that they had these plugs. There was a draining system, and they would plug up the draining system, fill up the temple courtyard with water. It would literally rise. The water level would rise, gather up all the blood and dirt with it, and they would open up the plugs, and everything would drain out. Halacha Tazayin, Chal Arba Asar Lias B'Shabbos. If Erev Pesach came out to be on Shabbos, Kemaseo B'Chol, Kach B'Shabbos, doesn't make a difference. Shabbos changes nothing. The same way you did in the weekday, you do it on Shabbos. They could even wash out the temple courtyard on Shabbos. She'ein Isur Shvus B'Mikdash, because all rabbinic ordinances do not apply in the temple. Afilu B'Davar She'ein Yitzarech Haveda, even if it's not for the direct necessity of the service. Isur Shvus B'Mikdash, Heter Hu. Any rabbinic injunctions in the temple are totally permitted. Halacha Yud Zayin is one exception. Ein kol echad ve'echad meiliches pische lebeisei b'Shabbos. Usually, you finished in the temple, you went straight home to roast your Korban Pesach. On Shabbos, you couldn't bring it right home because you can't really carry too much. The first group would go out, maximum distance, sit in the temple mount with their Pesachs. Second group would sit with their Korban Pesach in the Chel, that's the area just before the temple structure began, between the little seirig, a low fence for certain people that could not pass, and the actual walls of the temple courtyard. That's where they would sit. Third group would stay in the temple courtyard. Everybody would wait till Shabbos was over. Everyone would go home with the Korban Pesach and only then begin to roast the Korban Pesach. Otherwise, you cannot prepare on Shabbos for the weekday. Yudches shchitas haPesach uzrikas damai umichui krava vehekter chalavav. The actual slaughtering of the Korban Pesach, sprinkling of the blood, cleaning its intestines, and offering its fat, doichenes Shabbos. All of these things override Shabbos. She'i efshel la'asosam kedem Shabbos because they cannot be done before. Shekavol leizman. There's a time set for the Korban Pesach. Shenemar b'moy adoy. It says in the Torah, Jews make the Korban Pesach b'moy adoy in its proper time. Avol, but anything else, har kavasai, having it right over on your shoulders, v'hava asay michutz latchum, bringing it from outside the Shabbos border where you cannot walk past there, v'chatichas yabalte b'kli, or cutting off warts with an implement, with a tool, einon deichenes Shabbos. These things do not override Shabbos. Sharei efshel la'asosam kaidem Shabbos, because they can be done before Shabbos. If it has a wart and you can cut it by hand, then you can cut it by hand. That's fine. If it was a dry wart, you can cut it even with a tool. Because again, rabbinic injunctions do not apply in the temple at all. Also the roasting and the washing of its intestines, the full washing, do not override Shabbos. These are all things which can be done after Shabbos. What has to be done on Shabbos, you can do on Shabbos. Anything before or after preparations must be done before or after. What if you forgot and you didn't bring a knife? This is a big issue, because every person was responsible to slaughter his own sacrifice. So you got to bring your shchita knife from home. You cannot carry it on Shabbos. They used to do this. They used to put the knife, tie it between its horns or into its wool, and you gently prod the animal till it reaches the temple courtyard, and then you consecrate the animal. Do not consecrate the animal until you reach the Azara in this scenario. Why? Because once it's holy, you cannot just use it for regular work. Even though in this scenario, you're leading an animal on Shabbos, which is forbidden, this is considered doing it in an unusual way, for the mitzvah it's permitted. When is this allowed? If you didn't actually consecrate the Passover sacrifice yet, you didn't say this is the Korban Pesach. But once you consecrated it, you cannot bring a knife on it. You're working with sacrifices. Why would they allow you to consecrate your Passover sacrifice on Shabbos to begin with? Since it's a set time, you can do it. Regularly, you cannot consecrate a sacrifice on Shabbos because we don't know when you're going to bring it. But here you're bringing it today for sure, so you can consecrate it. You can also consecrate your celebratory sacrifice on a holiday without worry. A person slaughters his Passover sacrifice and boom, he realizes there's a problem. It's got a blemish or an internal mortal wound. You must slaughter it again. Another one. Weekday or Shabbos doesn't make a difference. Even 100. One after the other. You keep on going. Either until one becomes kosher, or it becomes dark, and you missed the mark. Once it becomes dark, you're pushed off to the second Pesach because you're beyond your control. You couldn't control that. It just became unkosher. But as long as you have a chance to make it kosher, you must try again and make it kosher.